Okay, we are going to get started. Thank you everybody for here we go. Hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for being here for today's honest conversation. This event kicks off ADHD Awareness Month, which officially begins tomorrow. And in recognition of the month, we're launching a 6-session series focused on ADHD in the legal profession. And you'll find more information in the chat. While neurodivergence is a broad umbrella, today we're focusing on ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, and ADHD, which is the co-occurrence of both ADHD and autism. This particular combination wasn't even formally recognized until just over a decade ago, yet research now tells us this overlap is far more common than once believed. Still, our collective understanding, especially in the workplace, has not caught up. So let's take a minute to ground ourselves in what we know about numbers from recent research, with the caveat that these numbers may underestimate due to ongoing underdiagnoses. So kind of our goal with the numbers is just to normalize it, right? So approximately 6% of adults have an ADHD diagnosis. Lawyers specifically, the estimate is about 12.5%, so it's double the general population. Autistic adults are estimated to be about 2.2%, and the co-occurrence of both ADHD, autism, kind of wildly ranges between kind of 20 and 50% estimates. And a lot of that also is because this is new in the past 12 years or so. So we also know neurodivergence continues to be underdiagnosed, especially in women, people of color, and other historically underrepresented groups, often because symptoms may present differently and or how they are perceived by others. And at the same time, we've also seen more diagnoses in recent years, thanks to kind of broader diagnostic definitions, better screening tools, and a growing awareness. Okay, so what are we here to do today? We're here to explore the real-world experiences of neurodivergent professionals in the law, the strengths they bring, the challenges they face, and how we can build more inclusive and supportive workplaces. I want to highlight 3 important things before we start our conversation. One is that there's no one way to be autistic or to have ADHD. Neurodivergent people experience their neurotypes in diverse ways, even within the same diagnosis. And the truth is, neurotypical solutions rarely solve neurodivergent problems. It's not about trying harder. It's about trying differently. And difference is a natural part of human variation. It does not mean defect. It's simply a different way of seeing, thinking, and experiencing the world. And so we're here today to increase our understanding and work together to improve outcomes for everyone. And then before we dive into our questions, I'd love to begin by having our panelists introduce themselves, and they can share their name, kind of their role background, and what brings them to the conversation today. How about Paige? We'll start with you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. So just to jump in, because I know there's a lot to cover. So again, my name is Dr. Paige Victorine. I'm a clinical psychologist, originally from Salt Lake City, Utah, and on the East Coast since 2016. I have a doctorate in clinical psychology from Loyola, Maryland in Baltimore. I co-own a group practice in Arlington. We specialize in assessment and therapy with neurodivergent individuals and related kind of profiles across the lifespan. I myself do a lot of assessment and also work with couples and adults in therapy. I am actually married to an autistic attorney and a late identified ADHD autistic combo diagnosed in 2023 and 2024. So I have both personal and professional experience on these topics, and it has been quite complicated to be in both worlds, to say the least. So I don't know if, so speaking a tiny bit about why I'm here today, I absolutely love talking about this subject. It is, in fact, one of my special interests, to put it into autistic terminology for a second, because we live in DC among highly educated, career-driven professionals in fields where we already know, to Nikki's statistic, we are going to be around an incredibly high number of neurodivergent individuals, far more than not is my argument. So we're in a world of neurodivergent havens in the professions that we're talking about here, including law. So I'm really here to spread the message about the necessity of earlier and later identification of neurodivergence, just kind of pinpointing what it actually is, what it can look like, just highlighting how massively underestimated those stats actually are, why diagnosis matters in a neurodiversity affirming way, and just kind of like giving a sense of how this all relates to the number of psychological conditions that we know to come out of living with these neurotypes.
And hi, everyone. My name is Qualia Hendrickson. I am originally from New Jersey. I'm an attorney, estate planning and probate attorney. And I work right now at DC Affordable Law. So I work at a nonprofit here in DC. Before this, I worked in estate planning and probate for high net worth individuals in New York and New Jersey, licensed in New York, New Jersey, and DC now. And I'm pretty new to DC. Actually, this Saturday was my 1-year anniversary here. So I'm enjoying the area, and I am here because I think it was 2024, February 2024, when the DC Bar LAP program, you all did your first like ADHD in lawyers. And it was right around the time that I was suspecting that I had ADHD, and I decided to join just to see what it meant and what it was. And I saw myself entirely in the program, and it kickstarted my own like journey to figure out what was going on. And so a year later, a year and a half later, my life has completely changed. And so being here is my way of giving back, but also like being part of the community as well. So nice to meet everyone.
Thank you for that. Thank you both. Thank you both for kind of sharing of yourself. I really appreciate it. People are kind of still coming in, and what I had forgotten to do at the beginning, so maybe as a way to reconnect everybody, I was going to throw a poll out, which I'm going to launch right now, and just as a little bit of kind of basic just practice area, but like what brought you here, kind of, and then what your workplace maybe looks like. So I thought it would be a fun way to start. And I'll give it about a minute, and then we'll share it and maybe help guide some of the conversation. Great, just finish. About 10 more seconds. Okay. There we go. Practice area. We have a good mix, but heavily kind of government law firm and then nonprofit in there. And then a lot of other actually that I missed. That's good. I'm curious. And then so for kind of what are you here as, right? So 61%, someone who identifies as neurodivergent, 36%, someone who wants to kind of support somebody neurodivergent, and then someone who is curious. I might love that the most, right? Just like wanting to learn more about what we're talking about today. And then how would you describe your workplace's support for neurodivergent professionals? It's good to see actually that about half are very supportive or somewhat supportive. And then it looks like a few may have some more to go, or just maybe not everybody's aware of what they are doing. So hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about that a bit today too. What I want to say to everybody too is that I have prepared questions. The kind of panel knows what some of these questions are, but like it is our goal is that it's a conversation. So if you have questions you want answered, please put them in the chat. I don't remember if I activated the Q&A, but if the Q&A is there, ideally it's the Q&A. If not, throw it in the chat. We will all watch and pay attention and make sure we get your questions answered. But let's start with maybe some shared language. So we're all starting from the same place. So Paige, if you could kind of help us define some key terms around kind of neurodiversity, neurodivergence, ADHD, autism, that would be great.
Sure. So just kind of starting with, again, all complex topics. So I'm doing my best to really just kind of name broad strokes. Neurodiversity is really one way I like to think about it is society. All humans are neurodiverse. So neurodiversity is just kind of this constellation of traits and states in endless combinations and their interaction with context, right? So our environments and biology and everything else that comes with it. So when we're coming from a neurodiversity affirming framework, we're trying to stay away from pathologizing, from disorder language, and just kind of understand the collective as, you know, again, kind of being unique combinations of different traits and states. So I do also like to mention that the kind of the phrase that's popular out there of neurotypicality, I would argue that this is kind of a construct rather than a binary. I'm neurotypical, that guy's neurodivergent. It's just kind of situational. If you're neurotypical in an environment of autistic lawyers, that's neurotypicality, right? Or neurodivergence in a group. You're no longer divergent from that group of people. So, however, and how we're describing it right now, neurodivergence, I would argue, or kind of it is described as anything that is considered to fall outside of the expected quote unquote average. So you think about a bell curve of any given behavior or cognitive experience, wherever you kind of pinpoint on that, if there's a pattern of your behavior or neurological wiring that's falling in a general cluster as we currently understand it, that is kind of that neurodivergence. So we know that there are certain patterns that correlate with particular neurodevelopmental profiles. So ADHD, autism, etc. You'll hear me using the word autism rather than ASD or autism spectrum disorder, because we understand that not to be kind of an affirming way of framing human difference that kind of falls in that, again, that kind of cluster of wiring. So I also like to say in terms of neurodivergence as it relates to ADHD and autism, we are not talking about a spectrum in terms of a straight line. I'm a little bit, or I'm very autistic, a little bit ADHD, everybody's a little autistic. This what we're actually talking about is kind of thinking about it like a wheel or a pie, where the different traits that we understand to fall in these categories, kind of how much or how impacted are you, or how much do you demonstrate those kind of various qualities. So that can be a huge reframe in terms of how we think about this. So yes, we also like to call, you know, kind of frame this in that framework as apparent support needs, right?
Mhm.
How much support needs does that individual have? So if you think about kind of a stereotypical autistic person, you might be thinking about certain traits or support needs that they have in terms of everyday living. I like to argue that that does not mean that there aren't substantial support needs for an individual that's verbal or displays kind of quote unquote typical looking behaviors. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. Yeah, and disability is relative too, right?
Mhm.
So so those are just kind of neurodivergence and neurodiversity. In terms of autism, ADHD, and ADHD, again, very complicated concepts, but autism briefly is kind of having differences in social communication styles or needs, and a need or a preference for routine, repetition, for certain sensory experiences. And so that's kind of a really, really tiny snapshot of that. The ADHD side of things, we can kind of think about them as being experiencing differences in executive functioning. So what that means is how individuals experience attention, what they're paying attention to. We will kind of describe this as having selective attention, dynamic interests. How we engage with the world is, you know, kind of maybe all over the place in some areas, or intense and deep. Those, you know, how we kind of transition through things and track and yeah, executive functioning is kind of the overarching difference there. ADHD is kind of the phrase that we use to describe a combination neurotype. So any variety of those traits that, if kind of parsed apart by somebody that knows what they're looking for, you kind of have criteria that would meet standalone, quote unquote, autism, standalone ADHD, of which there are two subtypes currently, inattentive and hyperactive impulsive subtypes. So if you meet criteria for both of those neurotypes, ADHD is your neurotype. And arguably, it is a unique experience, both internally and externally. Some would argue that it can be a more difficult experience depending on the situation. So one last thing I'll say about this is neurodivergence in these categories, I would argue, is better kind of experienced as a context of a spectrum of extremes. So highly sensitive nervous systems, highly attuned or associative thinking, highly focused, intense, highly sensitive, and can also be particularly understimulated or underexperienced, disconnected or hyposensitive in different ways, both relationally and also just how we experience things in our bodies. So that's a lot, but there are 5 complex terms in a little bucket for you.
I really appreciate that perspective. Thank you. One of the things that jumped out at me, and Clay, I'd like to hear your thoughts too, but the focus too on the nervous system, right? A lot of, we say kind of like brain, but a lot of it is like this nervous system and the way the nervous system interacts with the environment. And one of the things I have found helpful with 2 children with neurodivergence is understanding like ADHD and autism in different degrees, like as an interest-based nervous system. That's really kind of helped framing for me. And it's something we talk about like more in depth when we do that work. So anyway, that jumped out and I just kind of wanted to highlight that piece. And then Qualia, if there was anything else you wanted to add that maybe from your own perspective.
No, what you said about it being kind of like interest-based nervous system, I have experienced that, and I feel like what Dr. Page was saying was even helpful to me because I'm still like a year and a half in, and I'm like taking notes, like, oh, okay, that's what that means. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. And I'm actually going to throw that question back to you. Just kind of, you talked about, right, your understanding of the way your brain works has been recent in terms of this, like a diagnosis perspective. But how has that shaped the way you understand maybe your own experiences, whether in the workplace or in other ways?
So I don't know if like everyone can relate, but I started learning about ADHD from like TikTok and Instagram because my sister had gotten diagnosed first and I was trying to support her. So, one of the things that I think I saw was that this like, unless you get a very, very formal diagnosis, this denial that it's real for you. And so I'm just prefacing that because I was about to say like, I don't feel like I've gotten a formal diagnosis, even though I have seen multiple doctors who have said like, yes. Um, but it wasn't until I guess my most recent doctor who did kind of give me like yeah, you have ADHD, but then she wanted to focus on some other things, that I think I started giving myself permission for like things to be okay. So when I started learning about it, when I started coming to the LAP program and hearing like that timing might be an issue for us, and focus would be possibly something that's really difficult. It at first was like, oh my gosh, that's what's wrong. And then it's kind of shifted since getting, the stamp of diagnosis, I guess, into more of a it is okay. Like, not it's wrong, it's okay. And so the question for me is more, how do I work with this now? Because it turns out I've always been like this. It's just that I'm more allowing myself to see it and recognize that I'm okay. I think either Dr. Page or you said earlier, like it's a question about difference, not that something is wrong. And so the more that I accepted that, okay, I just function differently, I'm starting to see how to give myself space and accommodate myself is one of the big things my sister and I talk about a lot. How do I accommodate myself in my own life? And how it relates or where I see it or how it relates to where I am in my career and my practice. I said earlier that my whole life changed when I finally kind of started accepting it. And one of the biggest things is I realized I had a huge issue with time. Like the billable hours of being an attorney were driving me crazy. And so one of the big shifts was I need to come into a job where I can still be an attorney and still function this way, but it's not so focused on how focused am I when I'm sitting in front of my computer and kind of getting those hours, because I was at a job that I was overworking just to meet like the bare minimum. So trying to accommodate myself and making my life fit in that way.
I just like, I'm sitting with the power of accommodating myself, right? And recognizing that like I am okay. It just this is just how my brain works. Like there's like a radical acceptance in that, right?
Mhm.
Versus resistance of like trying to be different and make it different.
Mhm.
So I just like wanted to give space for that for a
Oh,
minute.
thank you.
And I saw Dr. Page nodding a lot, so also wanted to throw it to her and see if she had a thought on that.
Yes. Yeah. I appreciate everything that's been said. Yes, I think that this experience for myself in particular was one of the most life-changing things, or the most life-changing thing, and everything that came from it. In so many ways, again, as a clinical psychologist that was doing this before, married to somebody that was quote unquote informally diagnosed, never challenged. Uh, for several years prior, this completely reshaped the way that I see my work, the world, other people. And to Qualia, to your point, like how do you support yourself better? Seeing this through all the different, all the other conditions and ways that we're approaching therapy, it's great, it's helpful. It was just it wasn't until this that was kind of realizing why and how much this matters in terms of how we approach this, how it changes our sense of self, how many things it addresses in one go. It's kind of crazy once you start to learn about this.
Yeah.
From the newer conceptualization of it, it's bizarre what isn't connected to this, and we kind of reframe our whole, like rewriting our autobiography, which can be a lot but is also quite profound and gives us a chance to actually live in a way that's more suited for our needs.
Yeah.
So
And I just want to add to that if I can, when you were saying like it changes how many connections you start to make of like, oh, this impacts every area of my life. My family and I tend to be very light about things and very funny. And like when I was really first going through it, I think when I did the first LAP, the like, what is ADHD and how can it pop up in lawyers? I actually turned my camera off and I started crying because I was like, oh my God, it's every like that's me. And so it's been a big emotional roller coaster, but part of accommodating myself has also been like finding the humor in like all the ways that it pops up. Cause I put a clock in my shower recently because I was like, I don't know what 10 minutes is. So, and and then yes, exactly. Like we laugh about it. And then my mom, talking it out with my family, she's like, that's why we had to make the rule when you were a kid, like no leaving the kitchen when you're cooking, because I would always burn something, or I would always like something, I would burn water. Like something always went wrong, and the more humor I can find in it, the more it's easy the easier it becomes to be like, okay, it's going to impact my job in this way, but it's a little funny that I can't do dot dot dot, like what else can I do, and it takes away the big emotion that's still kind of there but gives it a little less power.
Thank you for that. And that actually touches in the chat. Somebody kind of also talked about like being later diagnosed. Sometimes there's like a sense of grieving possibilities, like that you might have been able to tap into like earlier, right? Like sometimes it ends up almost focusing on deficits or not knowing your strengths and how to like balance those. So I'm curious if that resonates.
It
that's
definitely
absolutely. Oh, sorry, go ahead. No.
Oh, I was going to say it definitely resonates with me because I think that's why the humor is so important to me. Because when I first found out, when my sister first found out, it was that feeling of like, not just, oh, if I had known earlier, I could have been accommodating myself and I could have not struggled so badly before. But it also did feel, and sometimes still comes up feeling like, that this thing in my mind that I think or I thought I could be, maybe I can actually never be that. And am I okay with maybe I'll actually never get there, or I'll have to get there a completely different way. And so it won't even look like what I've been picturing the whole time. So for me, there's definitely been a lot of grief.
Yeah, and that's one of the main things that comes out of identifying this later on. Especially, we've been doing a little bit better, but not nearly enough of identifying folks in their later years. And so to think about coming toward the tail end of your life, right, with a couple of decades or whatever that might be, that can be that can have a lot of profound effects. And at first, it often isn't a positive experience as much as it can also be at the same time a relief, and promising and hopeful, or at least explanatory of some of the traumatic things, or the things that didn't happen or why. Again, it tends to be just a big mix of all the different emotions, even in a single example. And so that is kind of how we orient them in a therapeutic sense, and through our assessment, which we try to make therapeutic as well. What now? And what direction do I want to turn my life toward? What valued areas have I, have I been moving toward, and can I move toward differently? What's kind of been neglected? And how can I have meaning in the remaining time in my life? One of which coming from maybe one of the most powerful things, which is understanding yourself better. What does that mean I can do in my relationships? Do I have a chance to restructure those and come up with an environment that is more suited to both of our needs? Just endless things can come out of that, and also holding the dialectic of this is also really complex to think about, and what could have been. Yeah, it brings up a lot of different things depending on the person and how supportive their environment is, and trying to understand them as a new version of themselves in some ways. Yeah.
I'm going to connect that a little bit, because kind of one of the questions we had talked about, right, had come up with was oftentimes neurodivergent people, like I described, this big gap, right, between how things feel internally and then how they appear externally, right? Sometimes that can be referred to as masking. But maybe starting with Qualia and then jumping to Dr. Page, but kind of maybe Qualia, if you can share kind of an example of like that for yourself and what that experience is, and then maybe Dr. Page talking about like this internal external disconnect in the workplace settings that you end up seeing.
So Dr. Page mentioned something like that the grief, or how we can accept, I think, depends also on what our environment looks like. And I think I had started out in a not supportive environment. And so one of the ways that I guess that I was masking is, or feeling that disconnect between what others say and what they're experiencing versus what I'm experiencing, is that I'm 7 years, almost 8 years into practice now. And for like the first 6 years, people would tell me all the time, you're doing great. Like you're great at this, and you're so good, and blah, blah, blah. And it was like this truth inside of my head that that is a lie. And they don't see that I am breaking my back to just survive here every single day. I would be like the first person in the office and the last person leaving at 11 o'clock, just to bill like 6 hours at the end of the day, right? It was awful. And it was after years of uh, someone just recently said that they call it a K through JD. So I went straight through school. And school was like the most miserable time of my life, because everyone else thought that I was doing really great and I was successful, and I was, from my family's perspective, becoming the first attorney in the family, and everything was fine. From my colleagues' perspective, I was so focused and dedicated to school and achieving and blah blah blah. But internally, it was just like, I cannot go to dinner tonight, because if I don't spend all this time studying, I will not be able to perform on that test. If I'm not up at midnight doing XYZ, I will fail. And so I would say like the first 20 to 31 has been every day, like I am failing, I'm failing, I'm failing, I'm failing. And I guess, yeah, the hours, like trying to make up my hours, is a way that I was masking, trying to like even being pleasant, I think, was a way that I was masking. There was a point in time at my last job where at some point, the paralegal started saying like, "Hey, you're not like as smiley and like as chipper as you are or were or used to be," or something like that. And it really made me upset, but in hindsight, realized that that started happening after I learned about ADHD, and after I started pinpointing, this is not okay. This is like, I'm breaking my back to do this. I'm taking way too much time here. Like, I actually don't feel happy and excited every single day. I maybe don't have to walk in looking like that. Um, and so those are little ways, but I do want to also focus on what everyone else is experiencing versus what I'm experiencing. I think before I knew about ADHD, I have a history of anxiety and depression in my family. So I thought that that was just my anxious mind. I thought that like I'm just an anxious person spinning everything out of control. And so I really had no trust in myself and my own decisions and like anything that I did. So I don't know if that answers the question, but those are my examples.
And I can piggyback off of that if that's okay. So, yes, that's a pattern that I hear in just about everybody that I speak with, or at least that kind of developing understanding that that's something that's going on as they continue to learn about it. I love what you said, and I mean, I love, and it's unfortunate, right, that what you said about, especially, realizing that things started to almost like become like you. I can't totally capture it in such a succinct way, but things started to change and people were more concerned, or like, you became, a lot of times what happens is like more cynical and more like upset about what you're realizing was like done or what you kind of participated in. And so that's just like a massive realization that can spawn a bunch of different things. And again, they're usually not all one version, good, bad. It can get messy. So I just wanted to touch on that. But a lot of times, but not always, there's that kind of felt sense of imposter syndrome, of at least kind of like downplaying successes. And in part, that could be because of that spiky profile, as you like to talk about it in neurodivergence, of being exceptional and things coming easily to you in a lot of areas. Like genuinely, you're taught socially, downplay that, or else you're like full of yourself. And genuinely kind of like you might not see how much you're struggling, depending on kind of the pattern of symptoms that you have or the level of support that your environment naturally or intentionally includes. So yes, so I
Actually,
see that. Go ahead. Yeah.
sorry, just to add to that, I didn't know that I was struggling. So that's you, I feel like, tied it up.
Right.
I didn't know that I was struggling. And so it wasn't until I found out about ADHD that I was like, oh, spending hours and being up from midnight till 5 a.m. to
Right.
prep for tests is actually not normal. This feeling that I
Right.
had throughout school that like, how is everybody doing this so easily? They
Mhm.
actually were doing it easier than me in some ways. Um,
Yeah.
so that was a big
Yeah.
like, oh, the world is
Mhm.
totally different. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, yeah, totally. Or why was this okay for me? Why was I doing okay in this area? Why am I still, again, that this comes easier for me? Or what was I not doing because I was like really, really into, school? Well, I didn't do a lot of things socially in college, or, I think it is strange to like want to have a job at a psych hospital at 18 instead of like wanting to go out and, like hang out and drink and whatever else. It's just realizing, well, what was I doing? Right? It doesn't all have to be just one thing. Um, so yeah, I wrote down kind of survival. Oh, you're so good at this. And then that imposter syndrome, those tend to be kind of those internal, external disconnects. Um, the related to this intense pressure internally placed and driven and externally felt or experienced to demonstrate your worth through your output. I think probably everybody in this space could go, oh my gosh, maybe not connect to that's what's happening, but just output is everything, right? So, and then to the concept of masking, this is especially prominent in females and minorities. Again, lots of contextual variables that kind of like punish stepping outside of what's expected. That's more okay in white male prominent spaces. It's just kind of the way that it is. No hate, just the way that it is. And so consciously and unconsciously, again, a lot of unconscious masking happens in this group because we've been living with this for decades. This is just what you do, or not realizing where you weren't actually masking so well, and that might be why things were happening to you, right? I see that a lot too. Like, oh no, your autism was there. We saw it. We just weren't, we were kind of phrasing it in the same way. So that's a survival mechanism too. Acting out, acting those social norms, suppressing our true feelings, our true interests, our sensory needs, or just happening to be in spaces where it's okay to nerd out about legal concepts or, psychology or whatever it is that we're talking about. And another reason that there can be this disconnect is there's this interesting concept that we are studying more called alexithymia. in autism research. And so long story short, it's just kind of a way of a difference in how we are describing or connecting or even being aware of our emotional experiences. So sometimes I'll describe this as very cognitive description of emotions, or, you know, I didn't realize I did this until after, to be like, well, how are you feeling? And I'm kind of thinking about outside reference points to describe how I'm feeling in my body. Even the concept of anxiety, to your point, like that was always my framework. And instead of people going, why anxiety about all of these things all the time since you were a tiny person, right? Like those are things that we need to kind of pay attention to. So that's a reason there can be a disconnect. Other ways that neurodivergent folks express themselves that are different. So nonverbals can be different, like our tone, the way that we communicate, our directness. Again, I'm just going to guess or stereotype that in a lot of the legal world, it's a lot more acceptable to just be kind of blunt, to the point, matter of fact, you got to get this done, less emotion. I've learned a lot from my husband's email communication style in this way. It's helped me with unmasking. Like, no, I do not need to say, hello, how are you? How was your weekend? I can just tell you what I need. So, but again, there can be less of that disconnect just naturally in a legal space, for example. And again, like I said, you can see a lot more of it than we know if you know what to look for. So everyone does that, unfortunately hides a lot of what's going on for somebody, or diminishes it, invalidates it. Oh, well, I do that, so it's not a big deal. We need to stop. We need to stop with that. We need to get curious about, well, just because you experience it, just both of us are suffering, it doesn't mean that, you know, or I'm okay with it, I've got my supports in place, you clearly don't. We just need to cut that out and try and kind of generally understand the disconnects, and instead of trying to convince the person that they're not there or that they're not as big of a deal. So we also, I'm just going to put this out there, we do tend to be a particularly judgy, rigid, and intense bunch of people. I'm just going to call it what it is. We do. So there is a lot of intersystemic, yes, Stephanie, a lot of intersystemic, like, yeah, just kind of attacks on each other. If I'm autistic and I believe this is the way things are supposed to be, this is what I'm going to project onto everybody. And if I'm the boss, that works out great. But if I'm not, then everybody else is going to be struggling in their own unique ways. So those are my kind of tangents off of that question. Yeah.
They are great. I'm like, there's so many that I could like land on. So I really appreciate that. I was like, right? That's it. I was like trying to figure out where to go. I think where I'm gonna go is, Claudia, you talked about this idea of like, I was the first person in, the last one to leave. I was the one who like was staying up all night to like get my work done. You know, what the kind of overextending myself beyond. And I guess I want to tie this into a question that happened in the chat around executive functioning, because I think a lot of times that's related to executive functioning. So maybe Dr. Page, if you kind of define what executive functioning is and like how it ends up impacting ADHD or autism, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So again, I wish I had like a graphic to bring up and make sure I touched all the parts. But again, executive functioning is kind of what's going on in the frontal part of our brain. So if everything else is chaotic, it's going to be harder to access those kind of connections to planning, organization, transitioning between tasks, keeping track of things, just how smooth and automated those things are. If you've got that intensified nervous system that is interest-based and kind of scattered all over the place, even autistic brains are doing this. Again, binary is hard for me. They're very similar, but you are going to struggle with clicking into that frontal lobe, that executive functioning space, as regularly. It's going to take more effort to do it. Your environment is going to look a lot more scattered. That's where the stereotypical ADHD desk or room or whatever might look like. So you're going to have doom piles, as we call it in the ADHD world, a bunch of unfinished projects. You're going to have a hard time estimating time, how much something's going to take, how long something's going to take you. It's going to be very, very, very hard often. And I would argue this is more in the autistic bucket, maybe, depending on your interest in the thing. Very difficult to unhook from it and just be done, even if you hate the thing you're doing. We can have a hard time with stop and submit it, please. I don't actually care about this discussion question. I don't actually need to find 2 more articles to support my case. So just being able to flex and bend into kind of the day-to-day and what we need to do requires that frontal lobe to be on, and we understand it to be a little bit different in our ADHD friends, etc. So
Thank you. That was a great framing and like some of those specific examples. Quiet, I know one, you said time was like a big one for you. And I'm sure there's some others, but I'm curious if wanting to make sure in terms of time, like, are there strategies you have incorporated over the past year consciously? And they're probably ones you already had been doing, right? Because we always kind of end up accommodating ourselves, even if we don't know we're accommodating ourselves. But any kind of strategies that you would want to talk about for people that are maybe trying to figure out ways to navigate this as they practice and live?
I feel like I'm still working it out, but I know that this is not an option for everyone, but time was just something I couldn't really function with. And so finding a job that was supportive, but also where time was not such a big, like the billable hours were not such a big deal, right? Like I said, that I know that that's difficult for everyone. Another thing that way that we've accommodated me at my job, which I'm incredibly grateful for, is um, I used to essentially wake up in a panic every day because get it like I was always late. I was trying to get in at 9 a.m. I was being spoken to about not being in at 9 a.m., which is why I was trying to be the first person there so that I couldn't be seen walking in and taking my time to like get settled and eat breakfast and things like that. And then, with a recent conversation with my supervisor and through therapy, realized like, well, if you're going to bed at midnight / 2 a.m., then maybe waking up at 5, 6, 7 a.m. is completely unreasonable. And an email at your version of 3 a.m., you should not be expected to like respond to that. So one of the things that we've done is that I actually don't start my workday until noon. And it is incredibly helpful because I'm waking up and I still have the like, I should really start the day to like I need to get up. But because there's no expectation for me to be in until noon or on my computer until noon, and I'm allowed to work until 8 p.m. or whatever, um, I find that I'm able to have less guilt when I'm awake at night, which I know is a pretty big thing for people with ADHD, I think, is being up super late. So it's less guilt. I wake up with no more panicking. I can wake up and say, do I want to do yoga? Should I incorporate movement today? Do I need to prep myself? Do I actually need to go into the office early? And so like early for me is 10 a.m. and everybody's surprised to see me. And so it allows like so much more flexibility with how my mind like actually starts to work and function. We also changed what type of work I was doing. So I know that you guys have been talking about like for lawyers, the ability to kind of hyper focus and nerd out about the research that we're doing or the um, being like super into this policy debate or something like that. What I found for me is that I thought that I was like that. And then the more that I've accepted myself, I realized that I am actually more social and extroverted and more on that ADHD scale than I ever imagined. And so as I kind of allowed myself permission to be that, I focus more on community building. So my job now is more focused on providing education to um, DC members about what wills and trusts are instead of you sit here and you write a 60-page trust. Um, I do a lot more like training. I still provide legal advice and do legal work, but I do a lot more consultations. And what I explain to my boss is like, I need to see a bunch of things all the time. I need to be talking to a bunch of people all the time. And so when I do come in at noon, I'm basically walking into a meeting with someone right away. And my meetings don't stop until 4 or 5 o'clock. And then that time when everybody's starting to leave is when the office gets quieter for me. And I get to sit, and if it takes me a little time to put around, it takes me a little time and no one is there to judge me and see me, right? And then I get to kind of lock into my work. So um, the accommodations have really been around like accepting how my body and my brain function and changing the work, changing the time, changing the speed, I guess, at which like work comes at me.
That's amazing. I mean, just
It's
like
accommodations have
it's
been
been yeah.
Yeah.
And also that you ended up in a workplace that can and is willing to support them in those spaces, as all workplaces should.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I ended up leaving ultimately where I was, because I was trying to explain, and it's a much more culture of like everyone needs to be at the office together 9 to 5, and I would say like, but we don't even talk to each other, we don't have meetings, we don't like, you have me sitting here in this room, I need something. And they I don't think they could understand and couldn't really accommodate, whereas this job was able to say, let's try. I mean, you're right, we're not seeing each other at this time, so let's see if it works. And thus far, with a lot of communication, it's going well.
Yeah.
Dr. Page, I'm curious if they're based kind of on that or just in your experience, whether it's strategies or kind of accommodations in the workplace, whether, right, a lot of that is also informally accommodating somebody. I mean, there are formal accommodations and those are important, but like there's a lot of informal accommodations that can happen, which may feel safer at first too. So I'm just curious, Dr. Page.
Yes, and I appreciate you distinguishing between formal and informal, because that's absolutely crucial to really consider the gamut of informal, especially because I would argue, and this isn't totally true, but in a lot of cases, especially when it's necessary to do so, I think with this awareness and adjustment really kind of honing in, people can be successful in a number of spaces. So a lot of times I work with neurodivergent folks who are like, I can't do this job, I need to get out. I would argue that with more understanding of kind of like what's available formally and informally, we can make things work a lot differently with what you have, if that makes sense, rather than it makes sense in hindsight where there might have been a lot of job hopping or like significant challenge in whatever it is you're doing. So I do want to say that to the point about like not everybody has the privilege to do that, or especially in this time that we're all in. I also wanted to note the informal accommodations, because understandably there's kind of a conversation in the chat going on about disclosure, which is I could go on for 3 hours about that by itself. But, again, the formal quote unquote diagnosis and disclosure, we really unfortunately do need to consider those things. I hate that is part of my job, is to let people know, I was very excited to share it and it kind of bit me in the butt in a lot of ways. That is not going to be everybody's experience, and that it's going to have positive but also potentially really negative effects. So anyway, to come back to accommodations, yes, ADA covers ADHD and autism, and so if you were to pursue formal accommodations in that way, some people do need the piece of paper that tells them, yes, you have this, and a psychologist specifically said that you do. But we really just overall need to broaden our definition of workflow. We need to, although I'm aware, and of course, there's so much diversity in law in terms of what jobs you do and all of that. There are seemingly some non-negotiables and processes that are required to be followed, but there are different ways in which we can support that part or the other pieces that's going to allow more energy for you to do the stuff that you don't have a choice about. So all of these have endless examples underneath them about what this could include. But kind of some of the broad strokes areas to consider here are bosses increasing clarifying communication. So ambiguity is the enemy of a neurodivergent brain. Sensory friendly work environments, that's a big one. Flexible schedules and remote work options. To your point, like, if nobody's here, why do I need to be here? Great question. Some people, myself included, working from home is the worst. Like, I have to be in the office even if I don't see anybody during the day, because in my brain, it wants to take me everywhere else and it just doesn't feel right. So it's not just telework. It could be a different combination of things, maybe a protected office or a shared workspace, my personal hell, excuse me, but that would be absolutely untenable for me. For others, it might be fantastic. So support for executive functioning. So no more just be organized, or here's 2 strategies. Why aren't those working for you? This is a big one, especially for our autistic friends, modified social expectations. So don't assume insubordination. Don't assume that they're not listening to you. Don't assume intentionality. consider tone. Nonverbals are going to be different again. I got myself into a lot of trouble as far as that went. In hindsight, we're also really good at picking out holes and stuff, and sometimes it is insubordination. However, again, but modifying also kind of extends to, oh, we have this happy hour and you're supposed to come to it. Please remove that requirement. That's ridiculous. Or, social accommodations, even in this meeting, most people have their cameras off. I struggle with that for reasons related to my own neurodivergence in terms of reading nonverbals and all that kind of thing. Like, I'm not going to say there's one right way to do this because it does create issues for the other people in different ways. But how can we kind of create a space where we're balancing out those social needs or sensory needs or whatever that is in a way that's good enough? And then where we can't, or we don't have 50 hours to try and figure it out, what can you do in the meantime? All right, I can use fidgets to just kind of like keep myself busy while I like watch my face on the camera and just kind of do what I need to do. Allowing, AI to take notes of meetings, or I take notes like crazy. So things like that, just, and then finding as much mentorship and advocacy and support. So this space is incredible. I love how much resourcing there is here, and also mentorship from other neurodivergent folks, informal and formal mentorship. And then company-wide neurodiversity trainings. There's no excuse these days, just like we really are trying to get on top of the DEI initiatives. This needs to get in that pool as well. We need to do a lot better about that. And it doesn't take much to learn about it enough to highlight it in your workplace. So again, could say 1,000 things underneath those. There's a lot of great resources that do, but tailoring it to fit your particular needs in those areas can be profoundly impactful.
Can I also, I actually wrote down like most of Dr. Page's suggestions, but I did see someone in the chat mention, right? Like, not everyone has the privilege, especially when you're working in big law, to say, I want to change my work hours, or I need to be able to change like the type of work that I'm doing. I am beyond grateful to this opportunity that I'm able to do that. But for the first year, I wasn't in that position, and I was scrambling to try to find ways to accommodate myself with an organization that really didn't know what any of this was, and they tried but really didn't get it at a time when I also kind of didn't get it. So some of the things that I did at that practice were is it like the Pomodoro method, right, where you give yourself, I'm gonna say it wrong, but
25-5. Yeah.
yeah, like we're gonna timing was really important. So I would have a timer on my desk that said, like, you're gonna give this 30 minutes and 30 minutes, and that's it, and you're gonna walk away. Because I would have a lot of, with not knowing how long a project is going to take, I would have a lot of anxiety getting started with anything. I still struggle with that, and I struggle with transitions. So I would have this big like tax return that I've got to do, and I would be like, I can't do that. I just don't know how to do that.
Break it down.
And I
Yeah.
would not be able to start. And so if I would say like 5 minutes, let's go. And as soon as the timer went off, usually I was already in the like flow of it, and so I could keep going. So that was something that I did. I started putting up whiteboards all over my office, and I would write out every single thing that I had to do, what would happen for XYZ case, what was happening next. I gave it to my partner, and so I'm waiting for him to respond. I had a really good relationship with my assistant. So I pulled my assistant to the side, and I didn't disclose like a diagnosis or anything, but I said, I think I'm struggling to like organize myself. I think I'm struggling to get stuff done quickly. I think I'm struggling to like, when I pass it off, I completely forget what happened. And then when they give it back to me, I now have to relearn that entire case to just like make an edit or something like that. And so because she and I had a good relationship and I was really good to her, she and I would sit once a week, every 2 weeks, something like that. And while my practice area wasn't doing meetings, she and I would have meetings, and she would say, all right, we've got these 25 cases, you got to do 30 tax returns. So which one did you get done? Okay, let's do 5 this week, right? So like I almost outsource the organization to her, with her being my accountability partner, because either way it was like gonna get back to her. I had note cards that like I'm obviously in a state administration, so when someone dies, there's a process that we have to take, right? So I would have note cards that said like, Mr. Johnson died. First step is get the death certificate. Second step is notify the court. Third step is this. And I would take the note cards off for like everything, so that I would see
So
it.
satisfying.
For me, I
Yeah.
had to see lists everywhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, that as it's been a benefit to me that I've been able to kind of upend everything and just say, I'm going to start over. But in the time when I couldn't, I used a lot of the resources that you guys provided to pseudo create organization for myself.
Not pseudo, you did, right? Like you did create organization for yourself. It may not have looked like other people's organization, but you created organization for yourself. And what I heard
That's
you
the
say,
key.
I looked at what some of my I knew how I learned, or I knew what I need. Like I needed visuals. I needed to break things down because something big is too overwhelming. Like there's so much in there that um you did. So I just want to validate the space of it wasn't pseudo, you really did it.
Yeah.
And we have 2 minutes left. There's a
All right.
great question in the chat, and I also want to ask kind of this final question. So maybe 30 seconds for acknowledging rejection sensitive dysphoria.
RSD, learn a lot about it, plug it into Google. I could say again 3 hours on the subject, but that is it is a trauma response and an not oversensitivity, a hypersensitivity to perceived or actual rejection. So we're gonna have been rejected a lot more than your average person. We're going to have gotten a lot of negative feedback, or or too much whatever. And so that can be a really debilitating thing that affects across the board. So I would definitely look into that for yourself, and you might see a lot of yourself in that framework, but important to see because it really makes a difference in terms of what you do in a therapeutic context.
Yeah. And I also connected right to that emotion regulation piece, that it's really hard. Go ahead,
yes,
sorry,
it affects us longer, more intensely. No one likes to be rejected. That's kind of the key, is how much does it stick with you, and how many types of interactions, even with strangers, will really ruin your whole day. Guilty.
100%. I was just going to say, the way that it impacted, I had to learn what the word and the terminology was. And then I realized someone said to me, because they were very supportive, they said, listen to what I'm saying. Because I had to learn that not everything that is said is actually rejection. I'm just taking it that way. So
Yeah.
I am much more focused now on the words that are said and trying to kind of neutralize them. And then I still let myself cry if I need that, but I recognize
what's happening.
me, right? I'm taking it to 11 and they just meant hey, can you edit this again? That's it.
Yeah. Not I'm the worst person ever. Yes.
That is right. All right, this is gonna be a lot. We're at 3, but I'm gonna ask this last question, and if people have to go, we understand. But what is one thing you wish people knew or understood about neurodivergence, kind of within themselves or others?
We are not the only ones. We are not the only ones. Okay. We flock together, your partner's kids, your coworkers, your parents, your extended family, your neighbors, and your friends. I promise you, if you're willing to open up to the possibilities, you might find yourself and others in your circles, maybe more than is comfortable for you at first. So we're not the disorder. We're living as zebras in a world filled with horses, is something I learned recently. And it is a powerful brain when we're reining it in and supporting it appropriately. We are the innovators of society. We make things run, but we do not need to do it all. So that is something I'm working on all the time. And so it's really kind of balancing out those two things. But don't be afraid of it. Go learn about it. It makes such a powerful difference. And it's not just, it's never just, oh, my dad. It's never just, oh, my older brother. It's never just, okay, that's all. Yeah.
And for me, I think it's that this type of diversity in all ways, race, gender, class, the brain functioning, how we think, if you allow for it and you actually study it and learn the perspectives that are in the same circle, right? It can make a work environment, it can make a family, it can make a relationship so much more interesting, and so function almost so much better. Once you actually I started accommodating myself, but in accommodating myself, I started learning to accommodate others too, and seeing oh, he's really good at that. So I'm going to make sure that Joe looks at all the Excel spreadsheets, right? It creates a more unity
Harmonious.
for everyone. Yeah.
Okay. I'm stopping. I was we are at time. It is. I really just appreciate both of your perspectives. I think they were so helpful.
Thank you.
Insightful and authentic. So I really appreciate that. I will send out an email afterwards with resources. So look for that, and just really thank you everybody for your time and your questions and your feedback. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was lovely. Take care.